and welcome everyone to our panel, CloudSmart Security. Perhaps this is one of the most important topics that we will discuss in all of Engage. In today's complex business landscape, security is at the forefront of so many businesses, and rightly so. But for many, it presents an increasingly complex challenge, which is why I am so thrilled to be joined by this panel of experts to discuss their learnings. With me joining today are Wim Decorte from Soliant Consulting, Koen Van Hulle from FM Connection, Greg Lane from Skeleton Key, and Srini Gurrapu, Vice President of Product Management and Design for Claris. Srini, I would like to ask you to kick off today's discussion, but also ask others in this group to contribute as well. On this broad topic here, what does Cloud Smart mean?
Thank you, Sangita. And first, I want to thank Greg, Koen, and Wim, my partners, for this fantastic discussion this afternoon. Regarding Cloud Smart, I mean, this is a topic that is very close to my heart. So by Cloud Smart, what we simply mean is delivering a cloud-like experience with the flexibility and the choice that our customers want. In other words, customers can choose to run the Claris products in the cloud native, or they can run on-prem, or eventually closer to an edge if you need to deploy it in remote branch offices with less internet connectivity. And this is a secular trend. Even if you look at Amazon or other cloud providers, they're all embracing this cloud computing, which is sometimes referred to as Cloud Smart. In fact, in Amazon recently, at the most recent event, they released a product called Outpost, which is essentially the similar thing. Why is this important for our community? We've always been, our roots are in on-prem, but at the same time, we know that the world is moving to cloud, and we need to embrace cloud. But we also build applications that cater to different types of use cases, sometimes that are subjected to different jurisdictional constraints, online, offline, remote, in oil fields, and so on and so forth. So it's imperative that we embrace all these different use cases and give our community the flexibility to run the Claris products in a form factor that's convenient for them. The second dimension of the Cloud Smart is about security. In fact, most organizations started the cloud journey with the cloud first. In other words, all the new workloads start in the cloud, and then they also embrace the on-prem. But Cloud Smart also means better security. And in fact, if you look at US federal government, they also went from the cloud first strategy to cloud smart strategy. And security to me is the most important thing with respect to the cloud. And by nature of the cloud, what I really would want our community to do is we want to make sure that we invest all our resources in actually building the best applications. We shouldn't be in the business of managing infrastructure. In fact, cloud means essentially that, running your apps and data on somebody else's premise. Whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, you want to be able to simply build your intelligent apps and use it in the form factor that you need. Coming back to the security, I believe, I spent about 20 plus years in the security, but I believe that before in a cloud, we were doing security wrong. In what I refer to as an infrastructure security, where we were very much securing the perimeter, securing the network, securing the endpoint, but we were never securing the crown jewels, which is the identity, data, and the configuration. And with the cloud, whether you're on-prem or in the cloud, you don't have a choice because you don't own the infrastructure. So the only choice to secure, I think, is focus on your identity and the data. So to me, Cloud Smart is extremely important for our strategy, for our industry. And it means the convenient experience in a form factor for our community. And it also means better security that actually builds better privacy, and which is today's discussion.
So with that, Srini, data is now accessible anytime and from anywhere, on-premise, on cloud, and devices and edge, as you rightly explained. And with that comes significant challenges and threats. So my next question for you, Wim, is what does this threat landscape looks like?
It's very interesting, and thanks, Sangita, and it's a pleasure to be here with this very select group of colleagues. Piggybacking on what Srini was saying, what really is happening is that the old model of security, by securing our perimeter and using that as a defense, it really has vanished overnight, right? The old model of building a castle with a white moat and a big gate, it doesn't exist anymore. And the industry was already going away from that, but most companies, as companies often do, they are kind of slow adopting that. But that whole migration away from that old model has basically gone to warp speed in just a matter of weeks. And what it really means is that a lot of companies fundamentally have no control anymore over where the devices are, where the users are, how their data flows, where data gets executed from. All of these things are new problems for companies to have. And the old security way of thinking doesn't really apply to that anymore. So we have to shift gears and figure that one out. And I truly believe that what Srini is saying is true, is the frontier really changes, right? The new security parameter really is the identity, and we have to figure out ways to figure out who is this user? Where does he come from? Do we trust the device that he is on? And how do we trust that? How do we even decide where do we put our trust in making sure that we can let that authentication happen and make the data flow and all of that stuff? So there's also much bigger risk of shadow IT. Because big IT or corporate IT or even smaller IT, doesn't have to be big IT from a big company, when they're slow adjusting to changes like that, well, as they say in the movies, life will find a way, right? Users will find a way to get their workflow done. And it may fly under the radar, it may not be caught, which opens up a bunch of issues, data loss, but also reputational and compliance issues, right? If you don't know what's going on, if you have no good reports on what's going on, then things may be happening without you being aware of, and that has huge consequences for companies.
Yeah. And Sangita, if I may add to what Wim said, I mean, that's such a fantastic, Wim, touched on, shadow IT and the identity as a new perimeter. And before joining Claris, I was part of building a cloud security company. I spent about 7 years. And when I used to go audit the companies about what is the cloud situation, I used to typically find about 7,000 to 10,000 cloud services that are in use.
Wow.
And in fact, some of the customers use is like, okay, let me knock down all these firewalls. But the types of services are like people are using Slack, people are using, this is not an ill-intended people. People are trying to get their job done, and the cloud makes this SaaS consumption easy. And in fact, the security mindset have shifted from how do we enable the shadow IT so that we could put the right risk and security controls around it, and accepting that is the way of life. It's the way of life. And the couple of things that I also add to what Wim said is, in the new world, the perimeter is its identity, configuration, and the data. These are the three pillars. In fact, that is supposed to be the crown jewels. And as an example, the thing that I would say is, when I used to do an audit of all the public IaaS usage across these companies, most of the S3 buckets are public, readable, and writable. So, when you are inside the firewall, you don't really take the precaution to put the right permissions. But when you move into the public S3 bucket, they're all worldwide available. The only gate that you have is getting the right permissions and getting the right identity and making sure that right content is secured appropriately. So it's as Wim said, is the identity, is the data, and the configuration that becomes the new perimeter. And this is an opportunity because now we have the opportunity to do the security right. So the cloud forces us to embrace the new good security principles.
I agree, and in that respect, my perspective on CloudSmart is that usually when we think of cloud, and certainly before this pandemic, we think of cloud as the backend infrastructure that we move into the cloud. And now what we're seeing is that it's much wider than that. Now we have our users in the cloud, and we have to be able to deal with those as well, and where they are, how they do their work. It's even at this point, we don't even know what hours people work because they work crazy hours. They have to deal with their kids and all of that stuff. So a lot of the traditional things have just gone away, and we have to deal with that. And that is part of the being cloud smart as well, not just the back end servers and all of these things.
Thank you, Wim. So, as you may already know, right, we have a large presence in our small to medium sized businesses. And I have sometimes heard from some of our customers that they think it's safer to be on premise. So, my next question to Greg is security an obstacle to cloud adoption?
Thanks, Sangita. No, I would say security is not an obstacle. And in fact, I would say, cloud adoption enhances security. And so a few points I'd make about that. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us that, customers who had already adopted a cloud strategy were in a much better position to provide, remote access to their FileMaker systems for those employees who suddenly had to start working from home. And the customers that were struggling the most were the ones who had the on-prem systems, and they had security and access issues and sometimes WAN performance issues. And there were a number of things we ran into there, but those who were already adopting that cloud strategy were in a much better position. The second point I would make is that, a lot of security best practices like SSL certificates and identity and access management, multi-factor authentication, server monitoring, all these things are easier to implement with FileMaker servers in the cloud than when it's on-prem. We work with a lot of different organizations, from very small, two-person companies to big enterprises with thousands of employees. And regardless of the size of the business, we always find it's easier to implement in a cloud environment than it is on-prem. And there's a variety of reasons for that. There's firewall issues and DNS issues and all kinds of things that come up. But if we had the choice, we would almost always rather implement in the cloud. The third point that I would make is that FileMaker Cloud specifically makes things much easier to implement those security best practices. It's all built in by default, encryption at rest, encryption in transit, multi-factor authentication with Claris ID, even the ability to choose a different identity provider. It's all built in there, and it's so much easier to get started, especially for those newcomers to the platform.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. So what I hear is security is the reason why we should move to the cloud. But moving to the cloud means better security only if we understand the role of shared responsibility. So my follow-up question to you, Greg, is what does shared responsibility mean?
Sure. So to me, shared responsibility, there's 3 or 4 groups that share this responsibility. There's the platform vendor, there's IT services, there's developers, and then of course the users or the organization itself that owns the system. And so let me talk about each of those groups a little bit, because there has to be this active collaboration between these groups in order to implement security and regulatory compliance and all these things. So the first group is the platform vendor. And for us, for most of us, our primary platform vendor is Claris. And Claris has done an awesome job over the last many years of steadily improving the security features and providing the tools that we need as developers to implement those security best practices. And I can really feel that momentum building at Claris as over the last year or two as the security features of the Claris platform have improved. And I'm excited about that. The second group is the IT services, and whether that's in-house resources or a managed service company that we're working with for a client or a cloud provider, they all have that responsibility of securing the infrastructure, the physical network, the physical machines, the servers, access to those devices, and so forth. So they share some responsibility there as well. The third group is probably the most important or the most relevant to this discussion today, and I think that is developers. So developers have a critical role, and I'd argue that over the years, the FileMaker community kind of tends to drag their feet a little bit when it comes to adopting new security practices. And I've really appreciated the work that Stephen Blackwell and Wim and many others have done over the years to provide education and encourage us all to implement better security. I frequently encounter developers who will still argue that SSL certificates aren't needed, or who are still rolling their own security systems. And we've got to get away from that kind of thinking. I think some of that comes from many of us started building FileMaker systems back when computers weren't online 24/7. And when I got my start with FileMaker, security just meant that you locked up your floppy disk at night when you left the office. So things have changed a lot over the years. But today we can't deny those risks that Wim outlined earlier, and we have to be security advocates for the systems that we're building for our clients. And that fourth group, the users and the organization itself that owns the solution, they have that critical responsibility as well to protect the access to the system, the physical security, their credentials, how they're using that data and sharing that data with other people outside of the system. As developers and consultants, we play that role often of training users and helping to make sure that the organizations that we serve understand the security and compliance issues and collaborate with them to ensure that their needs are met.
Thank you. I mean, that was really helpful, Greg. So, Srini, could you please tell us more about what's Claris's role in this shared responsibility?
Excellent question. Thank you, Sangita. And piggyback on what Greg said, and if I were to relay some of my experiences, when we started this, cloud security company in 2014 and 2015, kind of frame, when I used to have the CIO and CISO roundtable, and I used to ask them, it's like, do you want to move to the cloud? And everybody says like, no, only 1 out of 30 people in a room says like, we don't move to the cloud, and because of security. And then in 2017, that thing changed. About 70% of the people would say like, we're going to move to the cloud for security. But the missing link was everybody uses like, I'm 100% secure because I'm on Microsoft or Amazon. But if you were to just go read their EULA, what EULA clearly states is the shared responsibility that these cloud platform providers are only responsible for providing some of the infrastructure security. Like things like make sure that nobody is hacking into your infrastructure, like distributed denial of service and things like that. And then the AWS becomes the underlying infrastructure. Then there is a solution like a PaaS or a SaaS, like a Claris, which is providing a connect as a service or FileMaker as a service. That's a platform as a service that's built on AWS. So we are responsible for ensuring the security of our solution, the FileMaker. For example, all the things that Greg mentioned. We actually make single sign-on available. We make sure that we also have we use the KMS. The AWS KMS, that is almost like a hardware-based module, which is FIPS 140-2-3, right? So we provide the higher level application layer security controls, and then comes down to the end customer or the developer responsibility. So the customer responsibilities are always in the customer responsibility or the service provider responsibility is all about identity. Like as an example, AWS takes a great care of making sure that nobody hacks into their environment. I mean, Google does the same thing and so on and so forth. But you as a customer that's using AWS, you need to know to turn on single sign-on or use MFA. You can run to choose a static passwords that are subjected to a dictionary attack. That AWS not is responsible for that. And similarly, you can actually configure your S3 buckets with all worldwide read-only or worldwide read-write only. And Amazon is not responsible for that. You as an application developer, you need to know who are the right users, what is the right identity, what is the right data, and what are the right permissions. That becomes the Claris. So what we have done is Claris owns a significant part of this responsibility. And again, over the past 20 to 25 years, the security solution stack has become so complex. In fact, you need web proxies, you need web application firewalls, you need next-gen firewalls, you need breach detection systems, you need encryption solutions, you need MFA. And if I look at our own customers or the community of the developers who are going to build the intelligent app, can each one of them deploy this stack? That's the only way you can actually provide 100% security. Or not the 100% security, but the resilient security. So what Claris is doing is to minimize this burden, this exposure and the risk to our community. We've now taken on a bigger part of this responsibility, the encryption. And what we've also done is we partnered with Apple, and we've also partnered with Amazon to build on top of their own security services. And in fact, we also have some kind of shared responsibility between Apple Information Security and us. There is a white paper now that we published on the Claris website. I encourage all of you to go read it. that actually demonstrates to you how much security that we take it seriously. So in other words, the way that we have the responsibility is even our partnership with Apple, they build on the Amazon security. They're responsible for all the external security, external threat security, including KMS and making sure that they do the distributor denial of service, ensuring that we have the application security. Then the Claris responsibility is application level security. So in other words, we are then providing the insider threats, privileged user administrations, who is monitoring the DevOps and so on and so forth. So we've invested lots of resources in thinking through the stack with the primary motive that our community wants to build the most secure and most powerful intelligent apps. So we've actually owned a significant part of this responsibility. But at the very same time, going back to our CloudSmart is, even when some of our customers that actually use the on-prem, we want to deliver the same experience. And that's why we are investing in a Linux server. Eventually, we're going to make that into a virtual appliance that is hardened so that our customers don't have to worry about, do I have to patch? How do I do that? It almost believes like, if you look at our cloud, FileMaker server, it is a Linux server. It's the same Linux server, same virtual appliance. So you get the benefits of same hardened security across the board. So in other words, what we are committing to our community is we are taking a significant part of that shared responsibility that our customers need to own in ensuring that all our Claris products are secure.
Thank you, Srini. That was really insightful. So now that we heard a lot about the security, I want us to change a little bit on the focus on the data privacy. Data privacy and data protection concerns, as we all know, are driving new regulations around the globe. Regulations in California, then the general data protection regulations and compliance in European Union. So my next question is for you, Koen. What does GDPR mean and how does it impact organizations around the globe?
Well, GDPR is in fact a law, a privacy law in Europe that replaces all the local laws of the European countries, and that protects the private data of European citizens. It's not only companies within Europe that have to be compliant, but all companies worldwide need to be compliant to that rule if you store data of European citizens. So there were already privacy rules within Europe and in the several countries, but it gets a lot of attention and a lot of attraction because there are high penalties linked to it when you breach, in fact, the regulation. As a company in Listerius, we had to look into GDPR as well, and it was also for a company as us very confusing to read the laws and to try to implement it at customers and in our own company. Especially, we are technical people, and we want to translate that immediately into technical solutions. While this is in fact a law, and as always with laws, and if you listen to lawyers, they always do an interpretation of the law. And so one of the challenges we have in Listerius is that we have, in fact, offices from the upper north in Sweden until completely south in Portugal. And every country has his own little interpretation of that European GDPR law. So, for instance, in some companies, you need to have a data processor agreement between the supplier and the owner of the data. In other countries, it's not a common use to have that kind of contracts. So it depends a little bit on who to listen, what the impact is on your day-to-day business. Especially since these topics of privacy was hijacked, in fact, by a lot of security consulting companies. And depending to which consultancy company you listen, you get another answer on how to implement this in your company as well. But in practice, what does it mean is, in fact, if you are the owner of the data, you are the end responsible for the best practices of keeping data protected and private for citizens. And a lot of companies and a lot of people struggle with this because the first thing they want to do is to hand over that responsibility to a hosting provider, to cloud companies, to developers, for instance. But you can't. If you are the owner of the data, you always have the end responsibility of protecting the data. And I think the laws in California are quite similar in that perspective and that way. So the biggest challenge is, in fact, to bring awareness and to help understand clients and customers how to do best practice around keeping data private. And it starts, in fact, do I need the data? That's, in fact, the first simple answer. Do I need the data? If you don't need the data, don't store it. Then you cannot breach it. How long do I need the data? Is also an important question. And these are things that FileMaker or Claris not can solve for us as owner of the data. You have to solve that and solve these things for your organization, and check this with lawyers and check this with consultants. Of course, security is important if you want to be compliant with GDPR. So good security does not mean that you're compliant with privacy laws, but good security can help to be compliant with the privacy laws. So it's not exactly the same thing. And there is where Claris can help us. Claris can help us with, for instance, having data centers in Europe to host or cloud solutions, not only for FileMaker Cloud, but also for Claris Connect and tomorrow Next Gen. So this in this perspective, Claris can help us out and as a software builder to help us be compliant.
Koen, I think fantastic insights. And what you brought out is exactly, there is a lot of confusion in the industry. The GDPR has become a buzzword. And in fact, one of the customers that I talked to, they interpreted GDPR as global data portability, regulation, something like that. So instead of privacy, they were trying to make this data available to everybody, wherever, whoever wants it. And I wrote a blog about it. I think, what you touched on is the most important thing, which is, number one, first and foremost, do you even know what is a private data domain? What is PII? What is the user's private data? And do you have an inventory? Do you have mechanisms to even know what was the inventory? So it starts with that's number one. And number two is, the question that you asked, just like, do you really need to collect the data? We are living in a world, and in fact, I go to some of the rental companies. Everybody wants to grab all the data that you want, from driver license to this, to this, to this. I mean, in the hope that someday they all think that they become Googles. First, collect data hungry, collect all the data, and then someday they think that they're going to run an ad and make a lot of money. But that's not how it works. Google is Google because, something else, right? So in this world where even if you sign up for a simple coupon, people ask for a lot of information. So it all starts with, number one, making sure that you only connect the necessity information that you need for your application. I think Claris policy is that. And in fact, even our parent company, Apple, has privacy by default. They basically it's like only collect the limited information. But the most important thing for me is it's about collecting as limited information as needed, based on, number one, having a clear processes of inventorying the data, making sure that you have it where there. And then it's not even inappropriate to actually collect this data. In fact, some of the log files, if you actually keep it for 30 to 60 days, different countries actually have, after 30 days, if you actually destroy the data, that's also perfectly fine. It's the GDPR. All you need to do is you need to prove that you have in control of the data. You can track it. If something breaches, you have the mechanisms to notify the people that it's actually affected. And in fact, there is also a lot of mechanisms that are in place where you don't even need to have a data center in each country. If you can actually, like going back to what Koen said, if you can actually process the data, like for example, if you can tokenize the data in jurisdiction with the encryption keys, that's also equivalent to meeting the GDPR requirement. So to summarize this thing is, as Koen said, it all starts with, number one, collecting only the information that you need about the users, knowing what is actually private data, and then having mechanisms to track it where it's actually going, and then putting the right controls in place. But it's not about, GDPR simply doesn't mean that run data center in every house. Then we actually beat all the benefits of the cloud. So the cloud gets the economics of scale when we share the economy and when we share the data and you do the AI insights and so on and so forth. But the good news is there are a lot of controls that are in place. There are a lot of controls are in place to actually make sure that every citizen's privacy can be guarded. It's just that we need to create the awareness and put the right process, and that's what we are committed to here.
Thank you, Srini. And adding to that, Koen, about the data centers, we have also launched in Frankfurt. So we are now live in Frankfurt. So I just wanted to share that information. And we already in pipeline is Ireland and Sydney, Canada. So we are already working on the other data centers.
Yeah. Okay. I think some of those things, going back to is like, do not make the data center as the prerequisite to run Claris Cloud. And sometimes I hear the comment that, hey, we need the Data Privacy Act. That's why we need a data center in our country. So that's where the strict interpretations. I think we have a global footprint strategy to address multiple different reasons. Number one, to deliver the best experience. Right? So that's part of the cloud and edge computing. We want to bring the Claris, computing capacity closer to you so that you get the best performance, right? But with respect to the privacy acts, we closely study every country's regulations, and we want to make sure that we provide there. So it's not always like I only want to use the Claris cloud when I have a data center in Sydney, and so it's like that's not actually accurate, right? So different guys. So please reach out to us if you have any confusion. But I think my as Sangita said, with our existing coverage, we should be able to address both performance and the security and the privacy concerns.
Thank you, Srini. And now, I have some questions from the community as well. And I want to open it up for this panel. One of the questions is, will Claris ID be available for use in the FileMaker server? Would it provide any benefits to our on-prem customers? Srini.
Yeah, thank you, Sangita. Absolutely. In fact, that's part of the CloudSmart strategy. Going back to delivering a unified experience, if the customer is choosing an on-prem or in the cloud, we want to start with a unified identity. And the Claris ID is that unification of the IDs that allows us to deliver the same experience. But at the same time, we're also investing in SSO. In other words, not everybody have to create the same ID on the Claris. You can actually bring your existing ID that you have and then simply do an SSO through any one of the IDP providers. Could be Okta or Microsoft Azure. So, but the unification is there is a unique Claris ID that ties both the server and the cloud, so that you can actually do it. Today we are not there yet, but that is something that we are working in the roadmap. It will make sure that the question is, there is a follow-on question to it. Does that mean every user of the FileMaker platform need to have a Claris ID? The answer is also not quite. In other words, there are many use cases for the examples that require anonymous users or the guest users. Like, for example, if you're building an application in a school for temporary school enrollment, you don't need a Claris ID. So for that, we're also designing a first-class application with portals where you can also create an anonymous user and a guest user who are just that. In other words, you don't need a Claris ID, right? But everybody else, needs to have a Claris ID, and that becomes your unique ID, and that will also allow you to have an SSO so that you can bring your own ID. Anything anyone want to add? Greg, Wim, or Koen? I know Wim. I know you worked on the OAuth kind of capability.
Yeah, absolutely, and I fully agree that. Stephen Blackwell and I have been writing about modern authentication for a while now, and I think it's crucially important because clients ask for that, right? And especially in this environment, like I said, it went to warp speed, but even before, there is an ask for that centralized identity, and that's not really new, but it has taken on different proportions because if you look at legacy authentication, username, password, that is going to go away in a hurry, right? And we have to be ready for that, meaning that our clients will look at all their application, their whole portfolio, and say, we want to use something like Ping or Okta. And very often those use Active Directory or Azure AD in the background. But what those identity providers and brokers bring to the table is a whole slew of AI and ML that they let loose on all the data around authentication to say, is this Srini today from this device, right? Can we trust that is so? So these identity providers bring a lot to the table when it comes to reporting and proactive threat analysis and all of these things. And we will be asked to do the same for our FMBug applications. And the good news is that we already can to a large extent. So there's some work to do to make the UI look better and all of that stuff, but fundamentally we already can. So we've been on a bit of a warpath to make sure that the information is out there and that people can start thinking about that, because now is the time. Now is the time to adopt it. And the good news is it's easy to adopt.
I think that's an important point. What Wim said is we have this capability right now. In fact, if you look at the security report, like the Verizon DPI report, where they report all the data breach reports, the annual report, the number one reason is about static passwords and more identities. So every organization is trying to move away from static passwords. So this is something that we need to consider when we are building the next generation intelligent apps and FileMaker and other stuff. We have to embrace SSO as a primary mode of an authentication, so that our users or the applications of users are not bringing yet another identity and so on and so forth. So the good news is in the cloud, we already have the SSO capability with the OAuth, and we are investing in SAML so we can integrate with more and more solutions. And then on-prem, Vim and Soliant have already built a solution for some of our federal government customers. Please leverage that, and we're going to make that even more streamlined so that becomes our default way of life.
Thank you. My next question is, in today's world of all digital, the threat landscape is also very dynamic and breaches becoming routine. So what is an effective CloudSmart or more comprehensive security strategy to practice in this world?
So who is that for? Sangita?
Kevin?
Koen?
Sorry.
There's a couple of different aspects to that, I think, and what we just talked about fits into that big time, right? A modern way of authentication that comes combined with all of the proactive and reports and a lot of insights into the trust, right? Adopting a model like zero trust, which is big, where you approach these things as if everything is a breach, right? Trust nothing, trust nobody, and investigate, not just at the point where somebody is trying to log in, but also possibly at various points throughout the workflow to say, is this supposed to happen right now? Because it's not about just somebody stealing your password, right? It's also, can somebody poison your data? Can somebody make your data unavailable? They don't have to steal it, but if they can make it unavailable, then your company will suffer. So for me, part of the CloudSmart strategy is, a lot of people think of cloud as a one-way street. It's a one-way strategy. Like you go from on-prem to cloud, then you're good. I think it's a little more complex, where part of the strategy is also when you have something in the cloud and you need to repatriate it temporarily for whatever reason, that should be possible too, and there should be no penalty for that. There should be nothing that binds you to either on-prem or cloud and makes it impossible to switch around when you need to. So that is very much part of the CloudSmart strategy as well. And everything really that comes around deployments, like good backup strategy, business continuity, disaster recovery, all of that is very much part of what we're talking about here too, so that you have availability of your data and that your data is secure. You can restore to data if you need to. So it's a very big topic, really, with a lot of components and facets to it.
And be sure you have a plan up front. If you have a breach, that you know what you have to do on that moment, that you don't have to invent a plan at the moment you suffer a breach. So that you know what to report to the regulations, for instance, in case of GDPR, that you know how to communicate to your customers or to everyone who is affected by the breach, that you have that plan already up front in your company.
Yeah. what Koen and what Wim said is the most important thing. In other words, there is no 100% secure organization anymore. We'll all be breached at some point. If you're not breached, that means you don't know it. Most people don't know it. The key thing is that an effective strategy in this new dynamic landscape is preparing for resiliency. There's a framework called cyber resiliency. There are about 6 standard principles where it's about what Koen said, which is that do you have an incident response plan? And are you investing the right prioritization of your security strategy? Because not all data is the same. Your marketing data is not the same as your employee data. So you don't really use the same security controls. So there are about 6 principles, which is essentially what Claris security strategy is all about, which is about the overall strategies about preparing for resiliency and doing the right incident response, effective controls, and the right incident response.
So, Greg, would you like to share anything on this?
So mostly that I agree. I think the planning process is the thing that is most difficult with many of our small business clients, to convince them that, yes, this is an issue that you need to plan for what would happen if someone stole some of your data, whether it's an employee or somebody coming in from outside. What should happen at that point. And so I think the more we can engage clients with those conversations early, the better off we'll be.
Thank you, everyone. And that brings me to the end of this panel discussion. Thank you all, and thank you all our community for joining us today. And now back to my friend and colleague, Rosemary.
Interesting. Thank you, Sangita, and thank you everyone else on the panel for the very interesting discussion. Please join us in about 15 minutes for our final panel of Claris Engage 2020, Exploring the Low-Code Boom. And also then come back to the Claris Engage stream page or to YouTube to watch our high energy closing session. And then please continue to participate by following our on-demand content as it rolls out over the next several weeks. And again, I just want to express my heartfelt gratitude to all of our speakers, both in the live panels and in the on-demand sessions, for being flexible and rolling with us as we had to reimagine Claris Engage this year.